The sound of bamboo striking stone was the only clock I needed. Clack. Pause. Clack. It was a clean, final sound, echoing through the moss and manicured maples of the Kyoto garden. For the first time in 3 years, my world wasn't measured in nanoseconds of processing time or the frantic heartbeat of a venture capital deadline. It was measured in the patient rhythm of a shishiodoshi, the slow drift of a scarlet koi beneath a stone bridge, the deliberate unfurling of a fern. I had forgotten what this kind of quiet felt like, or maybe I had never known it at all. My name is Dr. Anya Sharma. I'm 34 years old, and for the last decade, I've lived inside the intricate, beautiful, and brutal world of genetic code. I see life as a language, a sprawling text of 4 letters, A, T, C, and G, that writes the story of everything from a virus to a blue whale. My specialty was building the dictionaries, the translation tools. I wrote algorithms that could read that language faster, more accurately, and more deeply than anyone else. I was, according to the cover of a magazine I now used as a coaster, a prodigy, a visionary, the future of personalized medicine. But here, in a garden designed for silent contemplation, I was just a woman trying to remember how to breathe. I had chosen Kyoto for its profound sense of peace and its notoriously spotty Wi-Fi. It was the perfect place to disappear. My phone, a burner I'd bought at a convenience store, was buried in my bag, its only purpose to receive a call if my mother had an emergency. It wasn't supposed to ring. It wasn't supposed to vibrate. It vibrated. A cold, familiar dread snaked its way up my spine, instantly dissolving the zen I had spent a week cultivating. The sound of the bamboo hitting the stones suddenly sounded less like a clock and more like a gavel. I pulled the phone out. One new message. It wasn't from my mother. The sender ID was a string of encrypted nonsense, but I knew the signature. I would know it anywhere. It was from Dr. Alastair Finch, my mentor, my idol, my executioner. The message was 5 words. Call ME, code red, my breath caught. Code red, Alastair's little piece of theatrical melodrama. It meant a catastrophe was unfolding, and more importantly, he had chosen his scapegoat. For a moment, I considered throwing the phone into the koi pond. I could let the little fish nibble on its plastic casing, and with it, my past. I could walk away, change my name, and spend the rest of my life studying the art of flower arrangement. But I couldn't, because this wasn't a surprise. This was the plan. This was the moment the first domino I had set 8 months ago was finally meant to fall. My part of the plan was simple. I had to answer the call. I walked back to the ryokan, my traditional wooden sandals clacking softly on the stone path. I didn't use my own phone. I used the inn's landline, punching in the scrambled number from memory. It connected on the first ring. Anya, thank God. His voice was a raw, panicked thing I had never heard before. The calm, authoritative baritone that had charmed Nobel committees and hypnotized boards of directors was gone. In its place was the sound of a man dangling over a cliff by his fingernails. Alastair, I said. My voice was even, betraying nothing. I watched a garden keeper meticulously pruning a bonsai tree outside the window. He was a study in precision and control. I channeled that. They're destroying us, Anya. The FDA, they've launched a full-scale investigation into Prometheus. Prometheus, my life's work. The predictive genetic diagnostic tool I had built from the ground up. It was meant to be my legacy. Instead, it had become his masterpiece and my prison. What kind of investigation? I asked, my tone still infuriatingly calm. A class action lawsuit was just filed, 30 plaintiffs. They're claiming Prometheus gave them false positive diagnoses for aggressive cancers. People had preventative surgeries, Anya, chemotherapy, based on our algorithm, based on your algorithm. I closed my eyes. It was worse than I had even modeled in my darkest simulations. The bonsai artist snipped off a tiny, perfect leaf. It fell to the ground unnoticed. And that's not all, he choked out. The press has it. The Boston Globe is running a front-page story tomorrow morning. They're calling it scientific fraud. They're talking about criminal negligence. He paused, and I could hear his labored breath. Then came the words I had been waiting for, the very reason for this call. Your digital signature, Anya. It's on the final deployment commit for the algorithm's core logic module. They're saying the lead scientist, they're saying you missed a fatal flaw in the code. There it was. The knife slid neatly between my ribs. He wasn't calling for help. He was calling to inform me of my own execution. He needed me back in Boston in front of the board to take the fall. To be the brilliant but reckless young scientist who flew too close to the sun. His reputation would be singed, but he, the wise, trusting mentor, would survive. He would express his profound disappointment and promise to rebuild. I need you on the first flight back to Boston, he commanded, a sliver of his old authority returning. We have an emergency board meeting tomorrow morning at 10. If you're not there, I understand, I said softly. I looked at the bonsai tree, at its twisted, beautiful, resilient form. It had been carefully, deliberately shaped over decades, so I'll be there. I hung up the phone. I didn't rush to book a flight. I didn't panic. I walked back out into the garden and sat on the same wooden bench overlooking the pond. The trap I had so carefully constructed over the last 8 months had just been sprung. He thought he was summoning his scapegoat. In reality, he had just armed his executioner. My revenge wouldn't be loud or violent. It would be like my code, elegant, precise, and absolute. It would be a story told through data, through time-stamped evidence, and through the inescapable truth of his own words. And it all started 3 years ago with a handshake that felt more like an anointing. The memory was so vivid it felt like the present. I was at Stanford, a 27-year-old PhD student high on caffeine and the thrill of discovery. My dissertation was on using machine learning models to identify precursor gene sequences for autoimmune diseases. It was groundbreaking work, and it had gotten attention. Specifically, his attention. Alastair Finch was more than a man, he was a legend. The Nobel Prize winner who had mapped the first oncogenes. His face was on the cover of textbooks I had studied. When he flew to California to meet me, it was like a god descending from Olympus. We met at a quiet cafe in Palo Alto. He was exactly as I had imagined, tall, with a mane of silver hair, piercing blue eyes, and an aura of effortless brilliance. He didn't interview me. He courted me. He spoke of my research not as a student's project, but as the foundation for a revolution. Your work, Anya, he'd said, leaning forward, his voice a low, mesmerizing hum, is the key. We're on the verge of an era where disease is not something we treat, but something we predict and prevent. At Gene Legacy, my institute in Boston, we have the resources. We have the funding. What we need is the vision. We need you. He offered me a position that was unheard of for a fresh graduate, director of a new algorithmic research division. He promised me full autonomy, an unlimited budget, and a direct line to him. He wasn't just offering me a job, he was offering me a destiny. You have a once-in-a-generation mind, he told me, his eyes locking with mine. But a mind like that needs protection. It needs a champion. Let me be your champion, Anya. Together, we will build your legacy. I accepted without a second thought. I moved to Boston, convinced I was the luckiest scientist in the world. For the first year, it was a dream. Alastair was a true mentor, pushing me, challenging me, celebrating my breakthroughs. I was working 100-hour weeks, but I was energized. I was on the cusp of creating Prometheus, an algorithm so powerful it could scan a person's entire genome and flag not just active diseases, but the ghost signatures of future illnesses, with a staggering 95% accuracy rate. It was the holy grail. The first crack appeared 18 months in. I had developed a novel compression technique that accelerated gene sequencing by 40%. It was a massive breakthrough that would save the company millions in computational costs. I was ecstatic. Alastair called it miraculous. 2 weeks later, he was the keynote speaker at the World Genomics Conference in Geneva. I sat in the audience, my heart pounding with pride, waiting for him to announce our team's incredible work. He stood on the stage, a titan in the spotlight, and presented my work. My slides, my data, my conclusions. He presented it all with breathtaking eloquence, but he presented it as his own. He talked about a problem that had vexed his lab for years and a solution that he had pioneered by combining 2 disparate fields of thought. He mentioned my name only once, in passing, listing me among a half-dozen talented junior associates who had provided support. I sat there, frozen in my chair, the air stolen from my lungs. The thousands of people in the auditorium were giving him a standing ovation. They were applauding my work, my sleepless nights, my breakthrough, but they were giving the credit to him. When I confronted him later, my voice trembling, he wasn't defensive. He was paternal, almost disappointed in my naivete. He placed a hand on my shoulder, his expression one of weary wisdom. Anya, you have to understand how this world works, he said gently. You are a brilliant but unknown young woman. If you had presented this, you would have been torn apart by rivals. It would have been dismissed. I am using my reputation, my credibility, as a shield to protect your work, to legitimize it. In the end, the science is what matters, right? Our names are secondary. I was young. I wanted to believe him. I wanted to believe that my idol wasn't a thief, so I nodded. I buried my hurt and my doubt, and I went back to work. But something inside me had broken. The trust. The awe. It was the first time I realized that my champion might not be shielding me. He might be standing in front of me to cast a shadow, one so large and so dark that I would simply disappear within it. And I was beginning to understand that his legacy, the one he had promised to help me build, was always meant to be his own. He just needed my mind to write it. That confrontation in Geneva set the tone for the next year. It became our unspoken rhythm. Alastair, the visionary, would identify a monumental, seemingly impossible problem in genomics. He would assign it to me, framing it as a unique challenge that only my mind could solve. I, desperate to prove my worth and perhaps to regain the simple praise he once gave so freely, would retreat into my lab. I'd work 60, 70, sometimes 80-hour weeks, fueled by a dangerous cocktail of ambition and fading hope. I would pour every ounce of my creativity and intellect into the problem, and I would solve it. I'd present my solution to him in his sprawling office overlooking the Charles River. He would listen intently, nodding, his blue eyes gleaming with an intensity I mistook for pride. He would offer a few minor suggestions: change a variable name in my code, adjust the color palette on a data visualization. They were the insignificant marks of a dog scenting a tree claiming territory that was never his. Then he would take my work and present it to the board, to investors, to the world, as the product of his team's tireless efforts, under his direct guidance. My name would be buried in the acknowledgments, a footnote in the story of his genius. When a massive $300 million funding round came through after I single-handedly restructured our entire data architecture, the congratulatory email from the CEO praised Alastair's visionary leadership. Alastair forwarded it to me with a simple note: "Well done, us," as if we were equal partners in the spoils, when in reality, I was the mine and he was the one holding the deed. I told myself it was the price of admission. I was working on problems that could change the world. I had access to resources most senior scientists could only dream of, but with every stolen victory, a piece of my professional soul withered. My therapist, a sharp woman named Dr. Evans, called it professional grooming. It's a subtle form of psychological manipulation. The groomer isolates you, makes you dependent on their approval, and slowly convinces you that your success is only possible because of their guidance. They make you essential to their success while simultaneously making you feel worthless on your own. Alastair had perfected it. He was the sun and I was a planet locked in his orbit, convinced I would spin off into the cold darkness of space without his gravitational pull. The breaking point didn't come with a bang. It came with a font change. It was a Tuesday afternoon. We were facing a nasty patent infringement lawsuit from a rival biotech firm, Patterson Diagnostics. They were demanding $12 million. The legal team was stumped. Alastair, as always, dropped the problem on my desk. "The lawyers see legal puzzles, Anya," he'd said. "I need you to see the data patterns they're missing. Find me a way out." It wasn't my job, but that had never stopped him. I spent the next 96 hours locked away, cross-referencing their patent filings with our own developmental timelines and a decade of public research data. I found it at 3 a.m. on a Friday, a fatal flaw in their claim. A piece of prior art from a little-known university study in Germany that invalidated their core patent. I didn't just find the needle in the haystack. I wrote a complete 20-page strategic brief outlining the legal argument, the data evidence, and the negotiation tactics. It was a checkmate. I emailed it to Alastair at 3:17 a.m. At 9:00 a.m., an email went out to the entire executive team and the board of directors. The subject line was, "Solution, the Patterson lawsuit." The email from Alastair was a masterpiece of concise, confident strategy. It was my strategy, word for word. He had copied and pasted my entire brief into the body of the email. The only change he made was switching the font from Calibri to Times New Roman. He had signed his name at the bottom. I stared at the screen, my coffee growing cold in my hand. There was no ambiguity here. No room for excuses about shielding me or using his reputation. This was the laziest, most arrogant act of plagiarism I had ever witnessed. He hadn't even bothered to rephrase my sentences. He had stolen my thoughts, my work, and my solution, and the only creative contribution he had made was a click on the font drop-down menu. Something inside me didn't just break. It vaporized. The awe, the respect, the lingering hope that I was wrong about him. All of it gone. The grief for my lost idol finally curdled into something cold, hard, and pure. Rage. I stood up, walked out of my office, and went straight to the HR department. I was going to resign. I was going to burn it all down. My hand was on the doorknob when I stopped. What would happen if I quit? I'd be the disgruntled junior scientist. He would be the magnanimous leader, sad to see such a promising but unstable talent leave. He would paint me as emotional, difficult. He'd keep his job, his reputation, his Nobel Prize. He would find another brilliant young mind to devour, and the cycle would continue. Quitting wasn't winning. Quitting was letting him erase me. I turned around and walked back to my office. I sat down at my desk, my mind clearer than it had been in years. The fog of his manipulation had lifted, and I could see the board with perfect clarity. Alastair hadn't been teaching me science. He had been teaching me the rules of a rigged game. And I realized, with a chilling sense of my own power, that I was a very, very fast learner. He wanted a legacy. I would give him one. It just wouldn't be the one he was writing. That afternoon, I didn't write code. I didn't analyze data. I began to build my weapon. It started simply. On my personal, encrypted hard drive, I created a folder. I named it Pandora's Box. The first file I saved was my original Patterson brief, complete with the email metadata showing I had created it 6 hours before Alastair claimed it as his own. The second was his email, with the font changed. I realized then that my greatest weapon was the very infrastructure of the company. Every project, every line of code, was managed through a version control system called Git. Git is a perfect, incorruptible historian. It timestamps every single change, every addition, every deletion, and attaches the digital signature of the author. Alastair was a brilliant scientist, but he was sloppy with technology. He would ask me to make changes, and I would commit them to the record under my name. Then he would have me commit his revisions, which were often just the removal of safety protocols, under my name as well, but always with his emailed directive attached. He thought he was creating a paper trail that implicated me. He had no idea he was helping me build my case against him. I started a new protocol. Every verbal directive he gave me in person or on a call, I would follow up with a polite, carefully worded email. Dear Alastair, just to confirm our conversation, you have instructed me to remove the redundant ethics checks from the sequence analyzer to prioritize processing speed. Please let me know if I have misunderstood. He would always reply with a simple, confirmed. Each of those emails went into Pandora's box. I discovered a clause in the company's IT policy that allowed for audio recordings of virtual meetings for the purpose of accurate minute-taking. I bought the best noise-canceling microphone on the market and started recording every single video call. His voice, calm and confident, directing me to cut corners, to ignore statistical outliers, to push the boundaries of ethical guidelines, all became data points in my secret file. I was no longer his protege. I was his archivist. I was meticulously documenting the slow, arrogant rot at the core of his genius. I stopped caring about credit. I did the best work of my life, creating the foundational architecture for Prometheus, knowing he would steal it. In fact, I counted on it. I built the most beautiful, revolutionary, and powerful diagnostic tool in the world. And deep within its elegant code, I built a cage. A cage designed perfectly for him. I just had to wait for the right moment for him to walk into it. He thought he was molding a follower. He was, in fact, forging a weapon, and it was now aimed directly at his heart. The opportunity arrived 6 months later, wrapped in the glossy packaging of our biggest project yet, the commercial launch of Prometheus. The board had set an aggressive, almost impossible deadline. They wanted Prometheus on the market in 9 months, positioned to be the crown jewel of gene legacy and the catalyst for a $10 billion valuation. Alastair, smelling another cover story in Time magazine, was ecstatic. For him, this wasn't just about science anymore. It was about his coronation as the undisputed king of biotech. He pushed the team, and by extension me, to the breaking point. The pressure to cut corners was immense. He called safety protocols, unnecessary delays, and rigorous validation trials academic luxuries. This was my chance. This was the moment to set the trap. I established a 2-tiered development system. Officially, I worked on the main development branch of the Prometheus code, the one everyone, including the company's auditors, could see. This was Alastair's version. Every time he ordered me to remove a safety check or weaken an ethical flag, I would do it on this branch. And for every change, I would meticulously log it with a commit message that was a masterpiece of passive aggression. Commit 4B7F, per directive from Dr. Finch, removing secondary validation layer on ethnic minority genetic markers to meet Q3 launch deadline. It was a signed, time-stamped confession, hidden in plain sight. But unofficially, on an encrypted server in my apartment, I maintained a second, secret branch of the code. I called it Prometheus Veritas. The Veritas branch, the truth. This version was my true work. It was perfect, fortified with every safety protocol, every ethical safeguard, and every validation check I knew was necessary. It was slower, more cautious, but it was accurate, and most importantly, it was safe. It was the version of Prometheus the world deserved, but would never see. Pandora's box grew exponentially, now containing two complete parallel histories of the same project, one of reckless ambition, the other of scientific integrity. The final piece of the trap was the most critical. I knew from my research that a major weakness in many diagnostic algorithms was their performance on non-Caucasian genetic data. The vast majority of genomic data sets used for training AI are overwhelmingly from people of European descent. This creates a dangerous blind spot. An algorithm trained on this biased data can be disastrously inaccurate when analyzing the genome of someone who is Black, Asian, or Hispanic. It was a problem I was determined to solve in the Veritas branch. In Alistair's version, however, it became my ultimate gambit. I built the algorithm precisely as he wanted, fast, lean, and optimized for the majority data set. But I also built a specific, hidden tripwire. I identified a set of rare, but benign genetic mutations that appeared almost exclusively in individuals of West African and Southeast Asian descent. In the official version of the algorithm, I coded a flaw where the system would misinterpret these benign markers as aggressive indicators for pancreatic and ovarian cancers. It was a catastrophic error, a ticking time bomb, but one that would only detonate when the product was used on a diverse, real-world population. It was an act of sabotage so subtle and so deeply embedded in the complex mathematics that no internal audit would ever find it. Only the creator would know it was there. I flagged the potential for this exact type of error dozens of times in memos and emails. I warned Alistair that launching without extensive, multi-ethnic trials was not just irresponsible, it was dangerous. He dismissed my concerns with a wave of his hand in one of our last video calls before the launch. "Anya, it's a statistical anomaly," he'd said, his voice laced with impatience. The call was being recorded. "We can patch it in version 2. The market will not wait for us to chase every single edge case. Get it done. That's an order, not a suggestion." That recording became the crown jewel of my collection. His voice, his words, his command, sealing his own fate. The final step was the most audacious. 2 weeks before the launch, I requested a meeting with him. I presented him with my final risk assessment. In it, I detailed every single corner we had cut, every safety protocol we had bypassed, and I included a stark, unambiguous warning about the potential for false positives in minority populations. I made him sign a physical copy, acknowledging that he had read and understood the risks outlined in the document. "This is just a formality for the legal files," I lied, my face a perfect mask of professional diligence. He signed it without a second thought, too blinded by the impending glory to read the fine print of his own downfall. That signed document, scanned and uploaded, was the last file I placed in Pandora's box. The trap was now fully set. All the pieces were on the board. Prometheus launched. It was a bigger success than anyone had imagined. The stock price of Gene Legacy tripled. Alistair was on the cover of every major magazine, hailed as a visionary, a savior, the man who had tamed disease. He gave a TED Talk that went viral. He accepted awards. He promised a future without cancer. And I watched. And I waited. I updated my resume. I started meditating. I knew the bomb I had planted would take about 6 months to detonate. 6 months for the product to be widely adopted by hospitals, for the data to accumulate, for the first victims of Alistair's ambition to receive their life-altering, false diagnoses. 3 months after the launch, I got the email I was half expecting, half dreading. It was an encrypted message from a man named Dr. Ben Carter, an oncologist at a hospital in Atlanta that was an early adopter of Prometheus. His message was short and chilling. "Dr. Sharma, I believe there is a catastrophic flaw in the Prometheus algorithm. We are seeing a statistically impossible spike in pancreatic cancer diagnoses among our Black patients. These results are not being confirmed by traditional biopsies. Something is terribly wrong. I've tried to raise this internally, but I'm being ignored. Can we talk?" Ben was the missing piece I needed, the human cost, the real-world proof of the damage. I flew to Atlanta under a pseudonym that weekend. Ben was a young, earnest doctor, his face etched with worry. In a dimly lit coffee shop, he handed me a flash drive containing anonymized patient data. It was the smoking gun. Dozens of cases, all showing the exact pattern of false positives I had predicted. I saw lives, not data. People who had been told they were dying, who were likely being advised to undergo devastating treatments for a disease they never had. The weight of it settled in my gut, a cold, hard stone of guilt and resolve. My theoretical trap had become a human tragedy. I incorporated Ben's data into my files. Pandora's box was no longer just a tool for my revenge, it was a testament to Alastair's crimes. Ben was fired a week later for violating data privacy protocols. It only strengthened my resolve. 2 months after that, I knew the time was approaching. The whispers were growing louder in the medical community. The first lawsuits were being quietly filed. Alastair, insulated in his executive bubble, remained oblivious. In our last one-on-one meeting before my trip, he was more self-congratulatory than ever. He talked about his upcoming nomination for the National Medal of Science. He talked about opening a new European headquarters. "You've done good work, Anya," he said magnanimously. "Stick with me and you'll go far." I smiled. It was the most genuine smile I had given him in over a year. "I have no doubt about that, Alastair," I said. A week later, I was on a plane to Kyoto. I left my work phone, my laptop, my entire digital life on my desk in Boston. I carried only the burner phone. I needed to be somewhere far away, somewhere quiet, when the world I had built came crashing down. I needed an alibi made of distance and silence. Now, sitting in the lobby of the Ryokan, the landline receiver still warm in my hand, I felt no triumph. Only a profound, aching sense of gravity. The dominoes were falling, just as I'd planned, but they were falling on real lives. My revenge had to be more than just about destroying Alastair. It had to be about redemption. It had to be about fixing what he had broken. I opened my personal laptop and connected to the hotel's Wi-Fi. It was time. With steady hands, I composed a new email. The recipient list was small but powerful. The 12 members of the Gene Legacy Board of Directors, the company's chief legal officer, and, of course, Alastair Finch. The subject line was simple: Project Prometheus, complete algorithmic development history, and a full account of directed safety protocol removals. The body of the email was just 2 sentences. Attached, you will find a comprehensive record of the Prometheus project. It contains all relevant code branches, email directives, meeting recordings, and risk assessments. I look forward to discussing this with you all upon my return. I attached the encrypted 120 gigabyte file. Pandora's box. My finger hovered over the send button. This was it. The point of no return. I thought of Ben Carter, the earnest doctor who lost his job for telling the truth. I thought of the anonymous patients on his flash drive. I thought of the brilliant, naive young woman I had been who had believed in a hero and found a monster. I clicked send. The progress bar filled almost instantly. I closed the laptop. I walked out of the Ryokan, back into the garden. The bamboo fountain struck the stone. Clack, it was a clean, final sound. The sound of a cage door swinging shut. For the next 3 days, I was a ghost. I turned off the burner phone and left it in my room. I didn't touch my laptop. I attended a traditional tea ceremony, my movements slow and deliberate, my mind a placid lake. I spent an entire day walking through the Arashiyama bamboo grove, the towering green stalks filtering the sunlight, creating a world that felt ancient and removed from the digital chaos I had unleashed. I was unreachable. I was, for all intents and purposes, a woman on vacation. But even in Kyoto, ripples from the explosion in Boston found their way to me. I saw it on the front page of an international newspaper left on a cafe table, the plunging stock chart of Gene Legacy, a red line falling off a cliff. I heard it in the hushed tones of 2 American tourists discussing the terrible scandal at that big genetics company. The world was finding out. The truth was spreading. On the morning of the 4th day, my self-imposed exile was broken. A courier, a young man in a crisp uniform, arrived at the Ryokan. He was holding a slim FedEx envelope and asked for me by name. My heart hammered against my ribs. It had my Boston address on it, but had been rerouted here with an astonishing and terrifying level of efficiency. They had found me. Inside was a single sheet of paper. It wasn't a request. It was a summons. A formal directive from the board of directors of Gene Legacy, ordering me to present myself at an emergency session. Friday, June 9th at 10:00 a.m. sharp. The final line was written in the cold, unambiguous language of corporate law. Failure to appear will result in immediate termination for cause and may trigger further legal action. They were trying to intimidate me, to reassert their power. But it was too late. I was the one holding all the cards now. I packed my bag, checked out of the Ryokan, and took the first train to Narita Airport. I flew through the night, the plane a quiet, dark tube hurtling me back toward my past. I didn't sleep. I rehearsed. I went over every piece of evidence, every timeline, every damning audio clip. I wasn't preparing a defense. I was preparing an execution. I landed in Boston at dawn on Friday and went straight to my apartment. I showered, changed into a simple, dark gray suit, and pulled my hair back into a severe, professional knot. There would be no emotion in my presentation, just facts, just truth. Walking into the Gene Legacy Tower felt like entering a foreign country. The security guards eyed me with a mixture of awe and fear. The receptionist fumbled with my visitor's pass. The news had clearly ripped through the building. I was no longer Anya Sharma, the quiet, brilliant coder. I was something else, something dangerous. The emergency meeting was in the main boardroom on the 42nd floor, a sterile, glass-walled room with a panoramic view of the city. 12 board members, men and women with faces like granite, sat around a massive mahogany table. At the head of the table was David Sterling, the CEO. To his right was Margaret Wu, the company's general counsel, her expression unreadable. And at the far end, looking small and pale and utterly terrified, was Alastair Finch. He had aged a decade in the last week. The silver hair was disheveled, the piercing blue eyes were bloodshot and hollow. He looked at me as I walked in, a desperate, pleading expression on his face. He looked like a man searching for an ally in the moments before the guillotine falls. I met his gaze for a fraction of a second, my own expression a blank wall, and then I looked away. "Dr. Sharma, thank you for coming," David Sterling said, his voice tight. "The board has reviewed the package you sent. We have also heard Dr. Finch's explanation. Now we would like to hear yours." "I'm not here to give an explanation," I said, my voice calm and clear, filling the silent room. "I am here to present the factual record of Project Prometheus." I walked to the head of the table, opened my laptop, and connected it to the room's main display. There was no fumbling. My movements were precise. My presentation was already loaded. The first slide was simple. 2 columns side by side. On the left, a screenshot of the commit log for my private, safe Prometheus Veritas branch, dated February 27th. The commit message read, V10 stable. Final version with all safety and ethics protocols fully implemented. On the right, a screenshot from the official company branch, dated March 1st. The commit message read, V11 release, modified per directive of EVP Finch. Removed safety validation layers 3, 4, and 5 to optimize processing speed for launch. A quiet gasp went through the room. It was the entire story, right there in 2 time-stamped, digitally signed entries. "As you can see," I began, my voice as steady as a surgeon, 2 versions of Prometheus existed. One was safe. One was not. The version that went to market was not the one I designed, but the one I was ordered to create. For the next hour, I walked them through it all. I showed them the emails with Alastair's directives highlighted in red. "Please remove the ethics flag entirely. It makes us look weak and indecisive." I played them the audio clips from our video calls. Alastair's voice, so calm and authoritative, filled the tense room. "I don't care about theoretical vulnerabilities, Anya. This deal needs to close. Remove anything that might spook the investors. That's an order, not a suggestion." I showed them the signed risk assessment memo, the one where he personally acknowledged the potential for false positives, his signature a damning scrawl at the bottom of the page. I presented Ben Carter's data from Atlanta, a series of charts showing the devastating, real-world consequences of his decisions. The spike in false diagnoses was not a statistical anomaly. It was a certainty, a tragedy he had been explicitly warned about. With each slide, with each piece of evidence, Alastair seemed to shrink in his chair. The blood drained from his face. He tried to interrupt twice, sputtering about context and misinterpreted conversations, but David Sterling silenced him with a sharp, brutal gesture. The board was no longer listening to him. They were captivated by the undeniable, meticulously documented story of his fraud. The final piece of evidence was a slide comparing his travel schedule and expense reports with the project's major milestones. It showed him accepting an award in Stockholm on the very day I was working a 36-hour shift to fix a critical bug he had created. It showed him at a $5,000 a plate fundraising dinner in New York, while I was fighting with the data integrity team over the very shortcuts he had ordered. It painted a picture not just of negligence, but of a man so consumed by his own fame that he had become completely detached from the science he claimed to lead. When I finished, there was a long, heavy silence in the room. I didn't feel triumphant. I just felt empty. I had deconstructed a man piece by piece using his own words and actions. David Sterling finally broke the silence. He looked at Alistair, his face a mask of cold fury. "Alistair," he said, his voice dangerously quiet. "Please wait outside." Alistair looked around the table, searching for a friendly face, a lifeline. He found none. He stood up, his movements stiff and clumsy. As he walked past me, he leaned in close, his voice a hoarse whisper filled with a venomous mix of disbelief and hatred. "I made you," he hissed. "I gave you everything." I didn't look at him. I looked at the screen, at the cold, hard facts of his betrayal. "Everything I am," I said, my voice just as quiet but steady and strong, "is in spite of you, not because of you." He flinched as if I had struck him. Then, with the last of his dignity evaporating, he walked out of the room, the heavy door closing behind him with a soft, final click. The Titan had fallen. The god had been exposed as a cheap, hollow idol, and I was the one left standing in the ruins. With Alistair gone, the atmosphere in the room shifted. The tension of the confrontation was replaced by the cold, pragmatic calculus of damage control. The 12 board members looked at me, not with accusation, but with a new, unnerving kind of respect. I wasn't just a whistleblower. I was the only person who understood the full extent of the disaster, and therefore, the only one who might know the way out. David Sterling cleared his throat, his CEO mask firmly back in place. "Dr. Sharma Anya. On behalf of this board, I want to apologize. It is clear that you were placed in an impossible position. Your integrity, your meticulous record-keeping, it's the only thing that has saved this company from complete annihilation." He let that hang in the air for a moment. It was an apology, yes, but it was also a transaction. He was acknowledging my value. "The board has voted unanimously," he continued. "We are terminating Dr. Finch's employment, effective immediately. And we would like to offer you his position as executive vice president and head of the institute." There it was, the prize. The corner office, the power, the title, everything Alistair had, everything I had once thought I wanted. It was my chance to run the kingdom I had helped build. A year ago, I would have accepted in a heartbeat. But the woman who had walked through the quiet gardens of Kyoto was not the same woman who had slaved away in Alistair's shadow. I knew what I wanted now, and it wasn't his tarnished throne. "No," I said simply. A ripple of shock went through the room. David Sterling looked genuinely stunned. I don't understand. This is the opportunity of a lifetime." "I'm sure it is," I replied, my voice even. "But I am no longer interested in fixing a broken system from the inside. I'm interested in building a new one." I clicked to the final slide in my presentation. The Gene Legacy logo vanished, replaced by a simple, elegant design. A stylized letter V intertwined with a double helix. Below it were 2 words, Veritas Genetics. "While on my personal leave," I explained, "I incorporated a new company in Delaware. Veritas Genetics will be a new kind of biotech firm built on a foundation of radical transparency. We are developing a proprietary platform built on blockchain technology that will create an immutable, unchangeable, and fully transparent ledger for all biomedical research data. From the first line of code in an algorithm to the final results of a clinical trial, every step will be recorded, verified, and made public. It will make the kind of fraud that happened here impossible." I let them absorb the sheer audacity of it. I wasn't just quitting. I was becoming their competition, their regulator, and their savior all at once. Margaret Wu, the general counsel, finally spoke, her voice sharp. "Dr. Sharma, all the work you did on Prometheus, all the underlying intellectual property belongs to Gene Legacy. You can't simply take it and start a new company." "I have no intention of taking any of Gene Legacy's intellectual property," I countered smoothly. "I have my own, but my departure from this company does have terms. And they are not negotiable." I looked directly at David Sterling, the man who cared more about the stock price than anything else. "Term 1, I will be given a clean separation from the company, with my full severance package and all vested stock options. I will sign a standard non-disclosure agreement regarding this meeting, but it will not prevent me from speaking about publicly available information regarding the Prometheus scandal. Term 2, My entire team, the junior scientists and programmers who worked under me, will be protected. There will be no retaliation against them. They are innocent, and they are the best assets this company has left. And term 3, I said, pausing for effect, Gene Legacy will become the first client of Veritas Genetics. You will sign a legally binding 5-year commitment to implement the Veritas platform across all of your R&D projects, starting within the next 18 months. The room erupted. An older board member sputtered about extortion. Margaret Wu started talking about fiduciary duty. I held up a hand, and surprisingly, they fell silent. This isn't extortion, I said, my voice cutting through the noise. This is a lifeboat, because you have a much bigger problem than one disgraced executive. The rot in this company didn't start with Alastair Finch. I brought up a new slide, one they hadn't seen yet. It was a risk analysis matrix. I spent the last 48 hours auditing the commit histories of this company's top 10 revenue-generating projects. What I found was a systemic pattern of cutting corners, of ignoring risk, of prioritizing speed over safety. Alastair wasn't an anomaly, he was a symptom of a culture that rewards recklessness. Your total potential liability, just for the projects I've flagged, isn't $20 or $30 million. It's closer to $200 million. I let that number sink in. $200 million? A company-killing number. The SEC will be investigating, I continued, my voice low and serious. The FDA is already here. The press is circling like sharks. You have 2 choices. You can fight this, deny it, and let this scandal drag you into bankruptcy and possible criminal charges for the entire board, or you can control the narrative. I looked from face to face. I had them. They knew it. You announce that you have discovered a deep, systemic problem within your own culture. You announce the firing of Dr. Finch. And then you announce the solution. You announce a bold, industry-leading partnership with a revolutionary new company called Veritas Genetics, a commitment to creating a new gold standard of transparency and accountability in biotech. You don't just survive this scandal. You lead the way out of it. You become the heroes of the story. It was a checkmate. I was offering them the one thing they desperately needed, a way to save themselves. David Sterling sat back in his chair, a slow, grudging smile spreading across his face. He looked at me, not as an employee, but as an equal, a formidable, dangerous equal. Margaret, he said, not taking his eyes off me, draw up the paperwork. The agreement was signed before lunch. I walked out of the Gene Legacy Tower for the last time, the signed contract in my briefcase. My past was a neat, settled ledger. My future was an unwritten page. I saw him one last time. Alastair was in the lobby, surrounded by security, being escorted from the building like a common criminal. He was holding a cardboard box with a sad-looking plant and a few framed awards. Our eyes met across the cavernous marble floor. His were filled with a defeated, impotent rage. Mine were clear. You ruined yourself, Alastair, I said, my voice too low for the guards to hear as I walked past him. I just kept the receipts. He had no reply. As I pushed through the revolving glass doors and stepped out into the bright Boston sunshine, I didn't look back. The greatest revenge isn't watching your enemy crumble. It's walking away from the wreckage without a scratch and building something better in its place. The 6 months that followed were a blur of focused, relentless creation. I moved out of my sterile Boston apartment and into a converted loft in a grittier, more vibrant part of the city. It was all brick walls, exposed pipes, and massive industrial windows that flooded the space with light. I traded my corporate suits for jeans and sweaters. I was building a company, but more than that, I was rebuilding a life. Veritas Genetics started not in a boardroom, but at my dining room table. I called the best people I knew, 3 of the most brilliant programmers from my old team who had been disgusted by Alastair's leadership, and a grizzled, cynical data ethicist I'd met at a conference years ago. I didn't offer them stock options and sky-high salaries. I offered them a mission. A chance to build something that mattered, to create a system where the truth wasn't just a virtue, but a mathematical certainty. They all said yes without hesitation. Our days were long, fueled by cheap coffee and takeout pizza. We argued over blockchain protocols, encryption standards, and user interface design. There was no ego, no hierarchy, just a shared, obsessive passion for the problem we were solving. For the first time in my career, I felt like I was part of a true team. I wasn't a prodigy in a gilded cage, I was a collaborator, a leader. My voice wasn't just heard, it was sought after. Gene Legacy, true to their word, became our first and largest client. The press release they issued was a masterwork of corporate spin, exactly as I had outlined. They announced Alastair's termination for gross negligence and simultaneously heralded their transformative partnership with Veritas Genetics to pioneer a new era of industry transparency. Their stock, after a terrifying 40% drop, stabilized and then slowly, remarkably, began to climb back up. They had survived. They had used my lifeboat. Our official launch was a quiet affair. No champagne, no fancy press conference. It was just the five of us, gathered around a laptop at 3 a.m. as we pushed the final version of our platform live. Gene Legacy's first dataset began uploading to our immutable ledger. It worked flawlessly. The first small step in changing the world felt less like an earthquake and more like a quiet, satisfying click. But the real healing didn't happen in front of a computer screen. It happened in the spaces in between. It happened when I got an email from Dr. Ben Carter, the oncologist from Atlanta. He had been rehired by his hospital with a promotion and a public apology after my evidence came to light. He was now heading up their new diagnostic ethics committee. His email was short. "Thank you. You didn't just expose a flaw in a machine, you gave a voice to the patients it harmed." Happened when I started receiving messages on a professional networking site from other young scientists, mostly women. They shared their own stories of mentorships that had turned predatory, of credit that had been stolen. They didn't ask me for advice on revenge. They asked how to build their own Pandora's box, how to protect their work, how to find the courage to speak up. I realized I hadn't just won a battle, I had created a blueprint. I started a small, informal mentorship group. We met once a month. I listened to their stories and I shared mine. I told them that the system was flawed, that it often rewarded the loudest and most ruthless voices. But I also told them that the most powerful weapon they had was the work itself. Be meticulous, I advised. Document everything. Your data, your code, your emails, they are your armor and your sword. Let your integrity be so well documented that any lie told about you will simply shatter against it. The healing also came from unexpected places. I started taking piano lessons again, something I had given up in college. The logical, mathematical structure of Bach was a comfort, a language I understood. But my teacher, a patient woman in her 70s, encouraged me to play Chopin, to embrace the emotion and the imperfection. For the first time in my life, I was learning to be comfortable with not being perfect. One crisp autumn afternoon, I was walking through the Boston Public Garden when I saw a familiar mane of silver hair. Alastair. He was sitting on a bench, throwing breadcrumbs to the pigeons. He looked diminished. The aura of power and brilliance that had once captivated me was gone. He was just an old man in an expensive but slightly rumpled coat. The criminal charges against him had been dropped in exchange for a massive financial settlement and a lifetime ban from the biotech industry. He was a pariah, a ghost haunting the city that had once worshipped him. He saw me. His eyes widened for a second, a flicker of the old anger, but it quickly faded into a weary resignation. I didn't feel hatred. I didn't feel triumph. I felt a strange, quiet pity. He had been given every gift, a brilliant mind, a respected name, immense power, and he had squandered it all chasing a hollow, fragile legacy. I gave him a small, almost imperceptible nod, a final, silent acknowledgement of the role he had played in my life. He looked away, back at the pigeons. I kept walking, the crunch of fallen leaves under my feet. He was a part of my past, but he was no longer a part of my story. My real legacy wasn't the destruction of Alastair Finch. It was the lines of clean code that protected the work of other scientists. It was the mentorship group that empowered young women to find their voices. It was the quiet confidence I now had in my own worth, a confidence that no one could give me and no one could ever take away. I had come to understand the truth of what I had told my mentees. The best revenge isn't about destroying the person who wronged you. It's about building something so strong and so true in the space they once occupied that their memory, their influence, simply fades into irrelevance. Alastair hadn't made me dangerous. He had forced me to discover the danger, the power that had been inside me all along, the quiet fury of a creator. He had tried to erase my work, and in doing so had made it and me indelible. The healing was the profound, quiet realization that I had not just survived. I had been reborn in the fire of his betrayal, stronger, truer, and finally, truly free. 2 years passed. Veritas Genetics was no longer a scrappy startup operating from my dining table. We had a real office now, a sunlit space in the Seaport district with whiteboards covered in complex equations and a ridiculously expensive espresso machine that was the team's only real indulgence. We had grown from 5 people to 50. Our platform had become the new industry standard, adopted by 3 of the 5 largest pharmaceutical companies in the world. The name, Veritas, had become a verb in the industry. Did you Veritas the data? It was the ultimate mark of integrity. I wasn't a coder anymore. I was a CEO, a title that still felt foreign and slightly ill-fitting. My days were filled with board meetings, strategic planning sessions, and interviews with journalists who now wanted to put my face on the covers of their magazines. I had, ironically, become the public figure Alastair had always aspired to be. But I did it on my own terms. I never talked about my personal story of revenge. I talked about the future of science, about the moral responsibility that comes with the power to read and rewrite the code of life. The final piece of the story came not in an email or a meeting, but in a simple, hand-addressed envelope that arrived at my office. There was no return address. The postmark was from a small town in rural Vermont. Inside was a single, folded piece of stationery. The handwriting was shaky, but elegant. Dr. Sharma, I am one of the original plaintiffs in the class action lawsuit against Gene Legacy. My name is Alina Vance. I am 68 years old. 2.5 years ago, your company's algorithm told me I had stage 3 ovarian cancer. My doctor, trusting the new technology, recommended an immediate and aggressive course of action. I underwent a full hysterectomy. I endured 6 months of chemotherapy. It was the most brutal, soul-destroying period of my life. It took everything from me, my hair, my strength, my hope, and it was all for nothing. The cancer was never there. The Prometheus test was wrong. For a long time, I was consumed by a rage so profound it felt like a physical illness. I hated the faceless, careless company that had done this to me. When your name came out in the press as the lead scientist, for a while, I hated you. But I followed the story. I read about what you did. I read about the evidence you collected, the stand you took, and the new company you built. I understood that you were not the cause of the problem, but the architect of its solution. I am writing to you today not out of anger, but out of a strange and unexpected sense of gratitude. The settlement I received from the lawsuit has allowed me to retire, to spend time with my grandchildren, to live without financial worry. But that is not the reason I am grateful. I am grateful because you showed me that one person, armed with the truth, can dismantle a corrupt system. You did not just seek vengeance, you sought justice, and then you built a better world on the rubble of the old one. My body will never fully recover from the poison of chemotherapy, but because of you, my faith in the possibility of integrity has been restored. I hope you find peace. Sincerely, Alina Vance. I read the letter 3 times, the crisp paper trembling in my hands. Of all the awards, all the accolades, all the financial success, this single piece of paper was the only thing that truly mattered. It was a receipt for a debt I hadn't even known I was trying to pay. The guilt I had carried, the cold stone in my gut over the human cost of my trap, finally began to dissolve. My plan had hurt people, but the truth I had unleashed had, in the end, brought them a form of justice and peace. It was a flawed, messy, imperfect redemption, but it was real. That evening, I didn't stay late at the office. I went home, poured a glass of wine, and sat at my piano. I didn't play Bach or Chopin. I just let my fingers wander over the keys, creating a simple, quiet melody of my own. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't brilliant. It was just mine. My phone buzzed on the table beside me. It was a text from a friend asking if I wanted to go hiking that weekend. I smiled. 2 years ago, my phone had been a trigger for anxiety, a conduit for crisis. Now, it was just a connection to a life I was actively, joyfully building. The story had started in a garden in Kyoto, a place I had gone to seek an artificial, borrowed peace. But it was ending here, in my own living room, filled with the quiet satisfaction of a life built not on the ashes of revenge, but on the solid foundation of my own truth. The rage had been the fuel, but it was not the destination. The destination was this: a quiet strength, a clear conscience, and the knowledge that I had taken the worst thing that had ever happened to me and turned it into the best thing I had ever done. I had not only built a legacy, I had finally, truly, built a life. And for the first time, I felt completely, utterly, and unshakably whole.